family is safe and protected and we're uplifted and can still make time for date night. Be oftentimes after school with him, helping with his antiques and watching.
The proposal did not arrive with a public announcement, a smiling photograph, or a carefully rehearsed statement. It moved quietly through private royal channels, carrying one condition that immediately changed everything. Harry and Meghan wanted a new arrangement with the palace, but William saw something hidden beneath the request. For Harry, the idea was not supposed to be a surrender. It was not a full return to the old system, nor an admission that life outside royal duty had failed. It was meant to be something in between. A carefully controlled bridge back to Britain, one that could restore a limited connection to royal life without forcing the Sussexes to give up the independence they had fought so hard to build. The plan reportedly offered a structure that sounded reasonable at first. Harry and Meghan would appear at selected royal events, maintain a more formal line of communication with palace offices, and participate in certain moments where family and monarchy overlapped. There would be limits. There would be boundaries. But there would also be recognition. To Harry, that mattered deeply. Years of uncertainty had left every visit, invitation, and public appearance carrying its own tension. This arrangement, he believed, could finally end that instability. He could remain committed to his new life while still holding a defined place within the world he had been born into. But the details changed the mood. The proposal allegedly gave the Sussexes unusual freedom to choose which engagements they would attend and how those appearances would be handled. That was where senior courtiers began to hesitate. Because what looked like flexibility to Harry looked very different inside the palace. To some advisors, it appeared to offer the visibility and legitimacy of royal status without the complete responsibilities expected of working members of the family. William said almost nothing. That silence unsettled Harry more than an immediate rejection might have done. While Harry reportedly saw the delay as another sign that his brother was trying to obstruct him, William was studying the consequences. His concern was no longer simply about Harry and Meghan, it was about precedent. If royal service could be reshaped around personal preference, what would stop others from demanding the same freedom later? William believed the monarchy depended on clear lines. Duty came with sacrifice. Privilege came with responsibility. And any arrangement that blurred those principles could create problems far beyond one family dispute. Then, he reached one paragraph buried deeper inside the proposal. And when William finally reached that paragraph, the disagreement stopped being about schedules, appearances, or public image, because the Sussex proposal had quietly touched one of the palace's most protected boundaries. Buried beneath diplomatic language was the detail William reportedly considered impossible to ignore. It appeared small on paper, almost procedural. But inside royal life, where titles, access, residence, and representation carry enormous meaning, that single clause threatened to reopen a question the palace believed had already been settled. The request centered on something deceptively simple: a recognized palace base or formal royal facility that Harry and Meghan could use during future stays in Britain. To Harry, it was practical. More than that, it was personal. Britain was still part of his identity, and he believed his children should not grow up feeling that their royal heritage existed only in photographs, titles, and distant family history. But William saw the proposal differently. A palace base was not just a place to stay. It carried symbolism, status, and institutional weight. The moment Harry and Meghan were given formal access to royal facilities, questions would begin immediately. Were they returning? Were they being restored to some unofficial working role? Had the boundaries created after their departure quietly changed? That uncertainty was exactly what worried William. Advisors reportedly feared that every Sussex visit would be presented as a royal comeback, even if the arrangement was privately described as temporary. And the proposal appeared to go further. It allegedly included dedicated staff coordination, meaning palace employees could once again become involved in managing certain aspects of Harry and Meghan's visits. For William, that changed everything. This was no longer simply about giving his brother somewhere secure to stay. It risked rebuilding the machinery of royal status without clearly defining the duties attached to it. His response was controlled, but firm. Private family arrangements could be discussed. Personal invitations could be considered. Security, accommodation, and family contact were separate matters. But William reportedly refused to support anything that might recreate an institutional position through vague language and gradual exceptions. Harry was furious. He believed his brother was transforming an emotional family request into something cold and constitutional. In Harry's mind, he was asking for a meaningful connection to home. In William's mind, he was being asked to blur a boundary the monarchy had already struggled to establish. And neither brother appeared willing to accept the other's interpretation. Yet the palace base was not the most explosive part of the proposal. Deeper inside it sat another request, one that reached directly into rank, ceremony, and Harry's public place within the royal family. The palace base had already created a serious divide, but it was the next request, one involving ceremonies, precedents, and Harry's visible place beside the monarchy. That pushed the private dispute toward open confrontation. Harry was not asking to return to the exhausting royal life he had walked away from. At least, that was how the proposal framed it. But he was asking for something emotionally powerful, recognition that leaving royal duty had not erased his bloodline, his history, or his place beside the family. That was where the argument became deeply personal. The question was no longer where Harry might stay or which office might coordinate his visits. It was whether he still belonged inside the royal circle when the most important moments arrived. The proposal allegedly sought something Harry had not been guaranteed for years: serious consideration for major national ceremonies and significant family occasions, rather than waiting each time to discover whether an invitation would appear. To Harry, that uncertainty had become humiliating. Every major event seemed to reopen the same wound. Would he attend? Where would he stand? Would he enter with the family or separately? Would he be treated as the king's son, or as someone who had stepped outside the institution? Meghan reportedly saw the unpredictability as equally damaging, arguing that their family could never find stability while every royal occasion became another test of acceptance. William refused to make that uncertainty disappear through automatic guarantees. His position was simple but severe. Ceremonial prominence, he believed, had to reflect present responsibility, not bloodline alone. Harry might always be his brother. He might always be Diana's son and the king's younger son. But within the working monarchy, those emotional truths did not automatically determine procession order, seating, entrances, or whether he should stand beside senior royals during major public moments. For Harry, that distinction felt brutal. He could not understand how the family bond could be publicly acknowledged, yet institutionally reduced whenever cameras appeared. William, however, feared the opposite problem. One carefully arranged appearance beside the senior royals could dominate headlines for days, turning a national ceremony into another argument about the Sussexes. That reasoning infuriated Harry even more. He began to see the entire dispute as proof that palace image management had become more important than reconciliation itself. To him, the message seemed unmistakable. He could be family in private, but only on carefully controlled terms in public. And that realization opened an even more painful question. Because if Harry's own place could be narrowed by royal duty, What would that eventually mean for the children carrying his name, his bloodline, and part of the same inheritance? But Harry's anger over ceremonial status was only the beginning, because behind those arguments sat another issue William considered even more sensitive: the future royal identity of Harry and Meghan's children. Until this point, William and Harry could argue over offices, invitations, ceremonies, and protocol as matters of royal machinery. But once the conversation turned toward the next generation, the dispute became painfully personal. Suddenly, every rule carried the weight of family, inheritance, belonging, and a childhood divided by an ocean. For Harry, this was the line he could not emotionally ignore. Whatever choices he and Meghan had made about royal duty, he reportedly believed their children should not inherit the consequences forever. He wanted them to know the family not simply through titles, old traditions, or occasional headlines, but through real contact, shared occasions, and a sense that Britain was still part of their story. The proposal allegedly pushed for clearer access to family gatherings and royal traditions involving the younger generation. That could mean future weddings, memorials, major anniversaries, private celebrations, and moments when royal children were brought together under one roof. To Harry, those connections mattered because distance had already changed so much. He feared that with every year spent apart, royal heritage could become something ceremonial rather than lived. But William faced a different problem. He could care about Harry's children privately and still refuse to turn that affection into guaranteed institutional privilege. Once questions of residences, balcony appearances, formal ceremonies, or official family positioning entered the discussion, personal emotion collided with public meaning. Every appearance would be interpreted. Every placement would be examined. And with royal titles and succession still part of the wider picture, even a small decision could carry enormous symbolic weight. That frustrated Harry deeply. He reportedly began to feel that his family was being moved further from the center with each passing year, not through one dramatic decision, but through a series of smaller boundaries that slowly became permanent. What William saw as consistency, Harry saw as exclusion. And the brothers were now thinking on completely different timelines. Harry was focused on what his children might lose now: relationships, familiarity, belonging. William was looking decades ahead. As heir, he was considering what rules would still make sense when today's emotions had faded and future generations faced similar demands. That difference changed the argument at its core. William was no longer deciding whether one brother deserved an exception. He was beginning to think about what kind of monarchy he might eventually be responsible for protecting, and whether bending the rules today could become a burden tomorrow. And that was the moment the disagreement changed completely. Because William was no longer responding simply as Harry's brother, he was beginning to respond as the man preparing for the crown. For years, William had been forced to balance two identities that rarely fit together comfortably: elder brother and future sovereign. Now those roles collided. Harry wanted understanding from the man who had shared his childhood. William believed the decision required something colder: the judgment of the king he may one day become. That shift changed the entire argument. William reportedly no longer viewed the Sussex proposal as a temporary solution to one painful family dispute. He saw it as a precedent. If the monarchy created special rules every time personal relationships became strained, then the institution itself could eventually lose the clarity it depended upon. His position was firm. Royal status had to remain tied to service, accountability, and clearly defined responsibility. There could not be one set of expectations for working royals and another for those who had stepped away but still wanted selected privileges. Advisors allegedly warned that such a model could blur the boundary between commercial independence and royal representation, especially if Harry and Meghan retained the freedom to pursue outside projects while also appearing under an official palace framework. For William, that was the danger. If one royal could leave full-time duty and later reclaim only the most valuable parts of institutional access, what would stop future generations from demanding the same arrangement? The monarchy, he believed, could not become something people entered and exited according to personal convenience. But the emotional truth was more complicated. William was not necessarily rejecting Harry as his brother. He was rejecting the structure Harry was asking him to approve. Yet Harry refused to accept that distinction. To him, institutional language had become a shield. Every painful decision was explained through protocol, precedent, or duty, while the personal consequences were left for him to absorb. The disagreement tightened. Harry believed the proposal deserved negotiation. William believed its central principles were already incompatible with the future monarchy he expected to protect. And after weeks of uncertainty, William reportedly made the recommendation Harry had feared most. The plan should not move forward in its current form. It was not presented as an emotional attack. It was not even framed as a permanent rejection. But in practical terms, it changed everything. Harry had expected conditions, compromises, perhaps difficult revisions. He had expected a battle across the table. What he had not expected was for the table itself to disappear. Harry had prepared himself for resistance, conditions, perhaps even months of difficult negotiation. But he had not prepared himself for William to stop the plan before it could ever become a formal agreement. The message Harry received was not dramatic in wording. That made it worse. There was no angry accusation, no emotional confrontation, no public rejection. Just the unmistakable conclusion that the plan could not proceed as proposed. Behind the careful language, Harry saw only one thing. William had stopped it. The proposal was not dead, at least not officially. Major revisions could still be made. Certain elements might be reconsidered. But Harry understood what the language really meant. The version he had hoped would reopen a meaningful path back toward the royal family had been blocked before serious negotiations could begin. What angered him most was not simply the rejection. It was William's influence. Charles was still monarch, yet Harry reportedly began to feel that his brother's view already carried the power of a future reign. If William opposed the structure strongly enough, could any agreement ever survive? And if every proposal had to fit the monarchy William wanted to inherit, then Harry began questioning whether genuine negotiation was even possible. That suspicion hardened quickly. Meghan reportedly urged him to seek clarity instead of allowing another round of carefully worded palace messages to drag on for months. Harry had lived through enough uncertainty. This time, he wanted to know who had actually made the decision, what could truly be changed, and whether his father was prepared to support any arrangement William opposed. That raised the possibility of going directly to Charles. For Harry, it seemed simple. If the issue concerned his place within his father's family, then perhaps the king should decide it. But even that path carried danger. Charles might want reconciliation deeply, while still refusing to approve a structure his heir believed would damage the monarchy later. And that was where Harry's frustration became almost impossible to contain. Family affection and royal authority had become tangled together. A father could love his son and still deny his request. A brother could insist he was protecting the crown while making Harry feel personally rejected. Every institutional explanation seemed to carry an emotional wound beneath it. Soon, the question was no longer whether the proposal could be rewritten. Harry wanted to know why William believed he had the right to draw the line in the first place. And when that question finally reached his brother, years of resentment, far older than this latest palace plan, were ready to return with it. The blocked proposal had already wounded Harry's pride, but when he finally confronted the reasoning behind William's decision, the argument widened into something far older than this single palace plan. The Sussex plan was supposed to be about the future. Instead, it reportedly dragged William and Harry straight back into the past. Old accusations resurfaced, old loyalties were questioned. And beneath every disagreement sat the same painful question neither brother had ever truly answered: when did family become secondary to the crown? Harry's frustration finally turned toward William himself. In his view, talk of precedent, duty, and institutional stability had become a way for his brother to control what remained of his royal future. He believed decisions that affected his family were being presented as neutral palace policy when, underneath, William's personal judgment carried enormous weight. William pushed back just as firmly. From his perspective, Harry wanted freedom from royal obligations while still resisting the consequences that came with leaving them. He had chosen independence, William believed, but continued to challenge every boundary that independence created. To William, that contradiction could not be solved by another agreement. And then, the older wounds returned. Years of interviews, memoir revelations, public criticism, private mistrust, and accusations had left scars neither brother could simply negotiate away. Harry reportedly believed every attempt at reconciliation came wrapped in conditions created by people who already expected him to fail. William believed trust had been damaged too deeply to be restored through paperwork alone. Even Diana's memory seemed to hang over the dispute. Harry could believe his mother would have wanted him protected from an institution he felt had become cold toward him. William could believe she would have wanted both sons to understand the duty attached to their position. The same legacy that once united them now seemed capable of supporting two completely different arguments. Charles was trapped between those positions. As father, he could want peace. As king, he could not ignore the consequences of forcing an arrangement his heir fundamentally opposed. And the more the brothers argued, the clearer it became that Charles could not repair one relationship without risking damage to another. Then, Harry reportedly issued his most serious warning yet. If the palace would not create a structured, meaningful relationship with his family, he might stop asking for one entirely. No more repeated proposals, no more waiting for invitations, no more fighting for a place that seemed to shrink every year. Harry expected that possibility to frighten the palace into compromise. Instead, William's reaction suggested the opposite. Harry believed the possibility of permanently stepping away would force the palace to reconsider. But William's response suggested something far more unsettling. Perhaps the institution was finally prepared to let that distance become permanent. William's answer was not a complete rejection of reconciliation. That was what made it so difficult. He reportedly left one door open, but it was not the door Harry wanted. The offer separated family from monarchy completely, forcing Harry to decide which relationship he was truly trying to restore. The alternative was far simpler than the Sussex proposal. Harry and Meghan could rebuild private ties with the family. They could be considered for selected personal occasions, spend time with relatives, and take part in moments that belonged to the family rather than the institution. But there would be no automatic restoration of royal standing around those visits. No guaranteed palace base, no dedicated staff structure, no predetermined ceremonial position. William was drawing a line so sharp that Harry could no longer pretend the difference was temporary. Being the king's son was one thing. Representing the crown was another. In William's view, blood could never be erased, but official status had to be earned through active responsibility. Harry reportedly found that distinction emotionally hollow. To him, The proposed compromise risked turning him into a guest inside the family he had been born into. He could attend, perhaps even be welcomed privately, but without any assurance that his history, rank, or former role would carry meaning when the institution itself was involved. Meghan was said to have another concern. Accepting those terms could make the reduced arrangement permanent. What began as a compromise might slowly become the new normal, leaving their family connected enough to remain visible but too distant to shape its own place within royal life. Charles, however, could see why the alternative might work. It offered a painful form of peace. Personal contact could continue without forcing the monarchy to rewrite structures William believed should remain fixed. That left Harry facing a choice far deeper than accommodation or ceremony. He had to weigh belonging against dignity, access against autonomy, family connection against what he viewed as unequal treatment. And the longer he considered the offer, the clearer one truth became. This was no longer really about returning to Britain. It was about whether Harry was prepared to accept William's definition of his future, close enough to remain family, but distant enough never to blur the crown's boundaries again. And faced with a choice between returning on William's terms or refusing the arrangement entirely, Harry makes the decision that leaves the palace with no comfortable outcome. Harry finally stops arguing over clauses, rooms, invitations, and ceremony. Instead, he makes the dispute brutally simple. If the palace cannot recognize a meaningful place for his family within royal life, he will no longer keep negotiating for fragments of one. And that decision immediately creates a new crisis. Harry reportedly decides that the reduced arrangement is not enough. He will not return simply as a selectively invited relative, expected to accept whatever place is offered while every institutional decision remains beyond his control. To him, that would not be reconciliation. It would be surrender dressed up as access. But his anger changes. The fury aimed at William becomes quieter, colder, and potentially more consequential. Rather than continuing the same cycle of proposals, revisions, refusals, and private disappointment, Harry begins considering withdrawal from the process itself. If every attempt to establish a structured relationship is destined to collide with the same boundaries, then perhaps there is nothing left to negotiate. That possibility leaves Charles in an agonizing position. If he allows Harry to step further away, the family fracture could deepen beyond anything easily repaired. Yet, if he overrides William to force a compromise, he risks creating an arrangement the future king believes could damage the monarchy he will inherit. A father may want reunion. A sovereign must think about consequences. For Charles, those two instincts now pull in opposite directions. William, meanwhile, refuses to reverse course merely to reduce immediate tension. He reportedly believes that short-term peace achieved through blurred rules would only create a larger problem later. In his mind, clarity now is painful, but confusion inside the crown could be far worse. Meghan is said to see one advantage in the crisis. At least the uncertainty is finally being stripped away. Painful clarity, she believes, may be better than years spent waiting for a relationship that never becomes fully defined. And so the Sussex question remains unresolved. Harry believes dignity requires refusing a diminished role. William believes duty requires protecting clear institutional boundaries. Both men see themselves as defending their families. Both believe the other is asking too much, and neither appears willing to surrender the principle at the heart of the dispute. For now, there is no dramatic reunion and no clean break. Only distance, tension, and a decision waiting to be tested by the next major royal event, family milestone, or succession-related moment. Because William may have blocked the Sussex Palace plan, But he has not ended the argument. And the next time Harry's place inside the royal family is tested, there may be no private proposal left to absorb the fallout.